Now, I am pleased, we have one more event before we break. I'm pleased to introduce Debbie Herndon. Debbie, are you here? Debbie is the Vice President of Programs for National Security Community at SAIC, and Debbie will introduce our closing fireside chat.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon. So I wanted to take an opportunity to let you know that SAIC is pleased to be a premier sponsor of the event today. And as a leading Fortune 500 company and an integrator driving our nation's technology transformation, our key to success is our unwavering commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. At SAIC, it does start with our leadership. We set annual corporate and individual education and performance goals, drive accountability across the enterprise, and measure our results. We encourage diverse teams, equitable employee experiences, an inclusive culture where all employees can be their authentic selves. Today's event has held a particular meaning to me as a leader in our community. I've truly valued those people who invested in my career, and I've cherished opportunities to invest in the growth of others. SAIC recently graduated its inaugural cohort of our Accelerate Her Women's Leadership Academy, and there was no shortage of intelligence community participants. Seeing so many young leaders invest in themselves and gain the tools to make a real impact on our mission is inspirational. I am proud of SAIC, INSA, and the intelligence community for its focus on our future. With that as a backdrop, it is my pleasure to introduce our closing keynote leader with a proven record of success. Tanya Wilkerson is the 9th Deputy Director at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. She brings a wealth of knowledge over 3 decades of experience in the IC. She previously served as the CIA's Associate Deputy Director for Science and Technology and Strategy. Ms. Wilkerson also held prominent positions within the NRO, spanning a range of activities, including research and development, acquisitions, and operations. She served as a change management leader within the NRO during a time of significant and complex structural transition. Ms. Wilkerson held simultaneous leadership roles at the NRO and CIA's S&T Directorate. Joining her on stage is INSA's President, Suzanne Wilson Heckenberg. Tanya and Suzanne, we look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. So first of all, I'd like to recognize Tanya for being one of the first people here today and for spending her entire day with us. We know you have a lot on your plate. And it's really important, I think, for your workforce to see that you're here listening, as well as for your partners. So shout out for Tanya for giving up her entire day. So several months after you started in your role as Deputy Director, Tish and I had the pleasure of coming out and sitting down with you for a bit of a meet and greet. And I was very impressed with how strategic you were, smart, you were thoughtful, you listened. And I also really liked you, too. And I thought, wow,
that's good.
Wouldn't I like to sit down with her and get to know her better over lunch or a cocktail or something? I just didn't realize it was going to be in front of 250 of our closest friends. So we have that opportunity today. So the first question that was scripted out for us was, what has your personal experience been as a woman in the IC? But I would like to pull that thread a little bit farther as a woman of color with a STEM background in the IC.
Thank you. So first of all, let me say thank you to INSA for having me here today, and thank you, Suzanne, for this opportunity. It has been a fantastic day, a lineup of speakers like none other, and I have taken away a number of tidbits from the discussions and the panelists that have gone before. So thank you. I really have appreciated all that's occurred to this point. So let me tell you a little bit about my journey to the IC. It's not a traditional one, actually, and it started when I was in high school, believe it or not. So I was a high schooler in the local Washington metropolitan area, and my high school principal knew a CIA officer who happened to reach out to him and to say, I'm looking for minorities that are interested in STEM because we have this great opportunity. It's called the Stokes Undergraduate Scholar Program. And through that program, it's almost like a ROTC sort of program, right? So you come in as a full-time employee and work during the summers, and then come on board at the conclusion of getting your degree. That's how my journey started. And one of the things that I always note with respect to that is that that individual, right, thought enough of taking the time to look and seek out talent. And because of him being willing to invest that sort of time, that's why I get to sit here in this position today. So the first piece of advice I'll offer as we're chatting, and that is, take the time. It's worth taking the time for others to be able to bring others into the community. So as a woman of color in the IC and as one with a STEM background, I've resonated with a lot of the comments that were made earlier. I have found that oftentimes throughout my career, I've been the only woman of color, right, at the table. But one of the things that I've tried to do when I find myself in that position is not think about it from that perspective, but rather think about what is it that I can individually do to influence change, or put another way, right? Think about what are the potential barriers that are helping or keeping others from being able to be at the table. And so I try to make sure that I'm thinking about that and thinking about ways that I can address those concerns. It's been fantastic. I have certainly enjoyed every moment of my career. I've had a chance to work not only across CIA, but also NRO and now NGA, which shout out to my NGA colleagues that are here in the room. It has been a phenomenal ride. But along the way, I've also recognized that in many of these positions, being a woman of color, that the fact that I'm in the position is much larger than just me. It's about every single person that's aspiring to be in this position, or whatever position I was holding at the time. And so I always try to approach it from that perspective. You didn't give me a 2-minute warning on answering the question.
That's not my job.
No, there you go.
That's not my job. So have you seen any, and Elise used the word earlier, evolve versus change, but have you seen any evolvement along those measures at NGA during your time there thus far?
Oh, at NGA specifically? And then I'll talk a little bit about the whole of the IC as well, if that's okay. So evolving, yes. So if I could talk a little bit about the representation of women at NGA. And this really spans across not just my tenure, but just kind of looking over the last 3-year span. What we have seen is that we have had slight increases in the number of women represented in our workforce. But the other thing that we've seen is that we've had similar increases in the number of women serving in supervisory and senior executive roles. And I think all of that is moving in the right direction. There haven't been huge increases, and I think the DNI hit on that in her comments in terms of we're making progress, but there's a lot more that we can do. What I love about NGA, though, is that we understand that diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is not a nice to have, it's an imperative from a mission perspective, and it's really part of what constitutes our strategic advantage. And so one of the things I've been really pushing on is we have to think about it as part of the fabric of who we are. It's not something separate that we're thinking about. So if I pull the thread just a little bit more on the evolution across the IC, I have seen that across the IC, and it was represented in the data that was shared earlier, increases in the number of senior leaders that are female or of a diverse background over the last several years. What I've also seen is that there's a willingness to come together as women, but also men in engaging women to the theme of today, right, to try to help to provide a support system, right, to enable success in some of these key positions. Now, I'll take a moment just to brag on NGA, if everybody doesn't mind that. When I think about what our history in the relatively short time that our agency has been in existence, it is really a moment of pride for us to think back on just how many women we've had in leadership positions. So indulge me just for a moment. I'm excited to be able to serve as the fourth woman who is serving as the deputy director. But think about the three that came before me, right? Dr. Dixon, the Honorable Dr. Dixon, who's serving now as the PDD&I, Honorable Sue Gordon, and then Ms. Joanne Isham as well. Wow. I'll tell you, when I stepped into this role, I recognized that I had big shoes to fill with the women that came before me. But I also don't want to leave out the fact that we've had many other senior women. Ellen, we heard from Ellen McCarthy earlier today. She served as our Chief Operating Officer at NGA. And then we also heard from Ellen Audrey, who's currently an NGA employee who's detailed to DCSA. And I can't leave out Tish, right? And I'm so impressed, and I have been truly grateful for the time that we've been able to spend together. But you know, what a wonderful testament to the evolution within the IC community to see you having served as the only female director of NGA and the first female to serve in leading a major U.S. intelligence agency. So when I think about evolution and I think about the history of NGA from how we've evolved, I think we're doing well. And certainly there's more that we can do, but we're definitely on the right path.
Well, I've talked to a couple of more junior NGAers. They're here today, and I think they will probably be the next women in the not-so-distant future.
I know
So,
some of them, and I've been engaging
yes,
with them.
I've noticed,
Yes.
so we appreciate that. And I want to remind folks that we're taking questions. I'm taking questions on question cards, so please hand them to our graduate student interns who are all looking for jobs in the intelligence community. So, you know, when we met several months ago, you talked very passionately about STEM, and STEM for young people, and sometimes young people in underrepresented groups from K through 12. Can you talk a little bit about the personal side of that for you, as well as what you're doing professionally there with any types of partnerships that NGA has?
Sure. I'll touch on the personal side a little bit first. This is an area that I am very passionate about, and I'll share a little bit about why I'm so passionate. When I decided to study engineering, I was coming from a high school where, right, I did not have any role models that I knew specifically that were engineers or had pursued a degree in engineering or were working in the engineering field. I knew that I loved math and science, and I knew that engineering would be a way to combine those interest areas. And I didn't have any particular STEM activities. You know, nowadays we look at what's happening in some of the schools, right? There are STEM clubs and various things. I didn't have that in my community. So I headed off to, with the help of the CIA and being part of that undergraduate scholar program, I headed off to Virginia Tech to study engineering, and I wondered, how am I going to use this degree in the future? A couple of things shaped the passion that I have today with respect to STEM and the efforts in STEM from a K through 12 perspective. And here are the couple of things. First, at Virginia Tech, I was introduced to the National Society of Black Engineers. And that organization is a collegiate and professional organization, but it's really focused on cultivating a group of underserved, right, individuals that are individuals from an underserved community that are excited about excelling academically and being able to make a positive contribution in their communities. So that was my first introduction. It was to NSBE. And then over the number of years later, as I came on board with the CIA and then continued to work in the community, I recognized that there was a way for me to give back from a personal perspective, and that was to serve as a NSBE advisor. And so I do so, and I have done so for now 9 years with an NSBE Junior chapter, which is focused on students that are in that K through 12 range. And so you might think, when does she have spare time to do this? What I will share with you is, it is early in the morning when I was sending emails this morning before getting here, and it is late at night. But the reason that I do it is because I recognize that in order for us to bring more diversity into the STEM pipeline, there has to be people like me and people like you that are willing to invest our time in raising awareness in the K through 12 community about STEM majors and STEM careers. Kids need to see people that look like them or people that they can relate to that are already doing what it is that they want to do. And so that's why I'm so excited about it, and that's why I spend so much time doing that. So you may think, oh, she's the deputy director of NGA. When I think of myself as a mom, and I also think of myself as a NSBE Junior advisor, pouring into that next generation, developing that pipeline. So I coach math teams, I coach teams that are, actually I just did a coding project with a number of middle school students they were absolutely thrilled. But that is what spurs my excitement about investing in the next generation. It's understanding that they need to see people that are already serving in the community, that are serving in roles like we are today, to inspire them to know that they can do that too. So how does that translate to work? Well, at NGA, and this is just probably the thing that Admiral Sharp and I talked about the most when I met him, and that was the fact that at NGA, not only are we engaging in educational partnerships at the collegiate level, but we are also thinking about how can we have influence from a community perspective. Now, Ellen mentioned earlier today our new facility out in St. Louis. And one of the things, and I know I wasn't responsible for this decision, but those that were, I thank you for being bold enough to make the decision that was made, and that is that we're putting our new facility in an area within St. Louis that really it reflects, right, an underrepresented demographic. And so one of the things that we've been also focusing on is how do we engage in partnerships with the local university. So we've got an educational partnership agreement with Harris Stowe State University, but we're also engaging across the whole of the St. Louis ecosystem, which includes community organizations. And those community organizations, guess what they're doing? They're pouring into that pipeline of talent that we need to be the next GeoInt professionals, that K through 12 pipeline. You know, when I sit back and I think about it a little bit, what I recognize is that today, right, there's a student that's in elementary school and they're just trying to figure out what is it that I'm going to do when I grow up. Or there's a student that's sitting in middle school and maybe they got a little more of a developed idea, but they still don't have it all the way framed out. Or there's a student that's in high school who's thinking about applying to colleges. What we need to do is make sure that we're inserting ourselves and investing our time in a way early enough that they start to think about how they could be the next students that are majoring in STEM, how they could be, selfishly from an NGA perspective, the next GeoInt professionals, right? That's where we need to put our time and energy to make sure we're investing in that area. I could go on and on.
Well, I'm glad you brought up, though, the communications and NGA West and kind of the transparency side of that, getting the messaging out. I had the privilege of going on a hard hat tour probably a year ago, yes, and was very impressed with how, when that site was being developed, there was an effort to preserve certain buildings and talk a little bit more in that community about NGA and what NGA does. So I think that's an important element of any sort of undertaking of that nature. So we had a panel earlier that talked about skiff life and work-life blend, which used to be work-life balance. For me personally, it's what am I going to suck less at on a given day, right? But you have 2 children.
I do.
And you work in a skiff. How do you get your blend, or do you?
That is a great question. So I will start first by saying that I have been truly blessed. And when I say that, what I mean is that I've got a support system that allows me to be able to do jobs like the one that I'm in, and to do so in a skiff environment and know that my family is well taken care of. So my husband and I made a decision many years ago to move closer to my parents because they retired and they said, we'll help you. So when the school, and I can appreciate the comments that were made earlier on the panel regarding, when the school calls and they're calling the cell phone, when the school calls, they call my parents first, right? They're closest by. They know that they're able to be able to address any needs that our children have. Now, we got one that's in college now and one that's high school. The high schooler doesn't think that he has any needs, but he actually has things that he needs us for. But I also have a truly supportive husband. And I say that, and I don't take it lightly when I say it, because, stepping into a role like this, I don't have as much flexibility with my schedule as I used to have. And so what that means is some of those things that were always really important to me, like making breakfast for my children in the morning before I left, that's really not in the trade space anymore. So my husband has stepped into that gap, and I just shared with him just yesterday how much I appreciated the fact that he stepped into that gap. But the piece about trying to balance outside of that support system, right, there are times that I know as a parent, I just absolutely have to be the one that's there. And every single day, I try to get that balance right, and some days I get it right, and a lot of days I don't get it right. But I have some just general rules for how I approach it. And here's the primary rule. Is it something that is only going to happen one time? And some of you have heard me say this. If it's only going to happen one time, then I'm going to be there. So what do I mean by that? Is this my son's only first basketball game in the 6th grade? Yes. Then I'm going to be there. Is it one of the 100 lacrosse practices? It's going to happen multiple times a week, for many weeks. Then it's okay if somebody else is helping them there. But what I don't want to miss out on in trying to achieve this work-life balance is those special moments. I think we all owe it to ourselves and to our family members to make sure that we're there. And I love the discussion earlier about being present. Not just there, but being present in the moment with them and celebrating their accomplishments or their first steps.
I like that a lot. So only one time, make that a real priority. Mm-hmm. So the name of this conference is the new IC, Empowering Women and Engaging Men. And again, I'd like to just recognize all the men who had the courage to come into the room and realize that a lot of these conversations apply to you all as well. But what can both men and women do to work to support more diversity in the intelligence community?
So I think, and we've heard some of this discussion earlier today, I think there needs to be a willingness, and I think that there is, right, to serve as mentors. When I look back on my career, I had a number of mentors. And I know many of our organizations have formal mentoring programs. Most of the mentoring that I received over my career was all informal mentoring. And it came from women and men. And it was at just the right moment in time in my career. And so what I would say is that the thing that we each should embrace is this idea of serving as a mentor and being willing to be there and pour into the next generation of talent that's being developed across the organization. It's made a difference for me. It's helped me from everything from should I consider this next job or not, to, is there something that I should be thinking about differently in terms of the way I'm doing my job. And I will share with you and some have heard me say this as well, I think the best piece of advice that I got from a mentor, and this person I really think very highly of, she said to me, you have been pretty conservative your entire career. As you're moving into this next position, and it wasn't this NGA position, it was another position, she said, you need to be willing to take risks. That was just a powerful statement. Those are the types of things that as mentors, we can help to infuse into those that are coming along in their career. I know for me, it stuck with me. And the reason it stuck with me was because this was a person that had seen me literally for my entire career. She had seen how I was operating. She had seen my accomplishments. She had seen things that probably she thought I should have done differently or better. But what she knew I needed at that moment in time was to be willing to step out and do something bold. And I took her advice, and I did that.
Well, and I think sometimes women are stereotyped as a little more risk adverse. They'll read a job description, and if they can't check 100% of the boxes, they don't apply. And so I think that's really good counsel. And a question I have is, particularly with the GeoEnt community, why do you think diversity is so important for that community there at NGA?
So if I could pull the thread just on one of the examples, and I just absolutely love that we've gotten so many shout outs today, but I'll pull the thread on the federal neurodiverse workforce pilot program. And I'll tell you first that I wasn't at NGA when that pilot program was initiated, but what I have seen is the results of the program. And it speaks to the why we need to think differently and we need to think broader than the demographic that we have always considered as part of the workforce. So in this pilot program, and I think some had spoken about it before, it was a partnership with MITRE and with Melwood to identify talent of talented individuals that are on the autism spectrum, and to look for opportunities to bring this talent into specifically for the pilot into NGA. And the benefit that we've seen is that the individuals that have come in, they are able to take in a lot of details all at once in a short amount of time. They're able to see patterns in information that perhaps those neurotypicals like me would not necessarily see. And what it really boils down to is an ability to see things through a different lens, a different perspective. So when you think about the global mission that we have from an NGA perspective and the need to be able to provide geospatial intelligence that gives decision advantage to our policymakers and decision makers, we need every different perspective that we can possibly get to be able to ensure that we're giving the right information at the right time. And that means tapping into talent that we may have not thought about before. So to me, that's the power of diversity, and that's why it's an imperative. It's not a nice to have.
I agree. And I know at one point you all brought on maybe a cohort of 5 or 6 individuals.
We had a total of 4 individuals that participated in the pilot, and 3 came on board, it was probably about a year ago, full time.
And even going to the extra effort, I think, to train polygraphers.
Yes. So extra care was taken to understand, and I think one of the panels earlier kind of touched on that a bit. So extra care was taken to understand how those that are on the autism spectrum might process information differently than those that are neurotypicals. So what are some of the things that we needed to consider in the polygraph process, right, and being sensitive to that? And then I'm sure anybody that has applied for a job in the IC knows that there's a lot of paperwork, right, that has to be completed as well to apply. And so we assign mentors to help to navigate through that application process. And all of those, I think, are best practices. What we're doing right now is moving from the pilot program to infusing and incorporating this element as part of our established Persons with Disabilities program.
That's very encouraging. Yeah. So we're going to shift a little bit to technology.
Sure.
This question is from one of our attendees.
All
NGA's N2W is trying to drive change by bringing on new technology. However, there is still resistance to change, or evolution, as Elise told us to say. I added that part. How are you championing and bringing innovation and technology to NGA?
So one of the things that we've done that has been what I think is unique for government agencies is we've published openly. You can go to our website and you can see our tech strategy. And so that helps to reach out to our industry partners and give them a sense of what is it that we're interested in and help to be able to bring new ideas to the table. We routinely invite companies to come in to be able to share with us their new technology so that we know we can stay on the cutting edge. Right? We recognize that we don't know everything that's out there, but we need to have a mechanism that allows us to be able to get that insight. So I think those are 2 significant pieces. As it relates to N2W, and this is just fantastic, not a decision that I made, but I think is absolutely fabulous, and this is that we waited until the absolute last point in time that we could make the decision with respect to the tech that was going to go into the facility. And why is that important? Because so often given, in the government realm, we have to make those decisions so far in advance that the technology has evolved over time, and we don't get to take full advantage of that. Now, that doesn't come without some risk, right? But it was a risk willing to take, because as long as you can effectively manage that, I think it was certainly the best way to go.
So here's another question
Sure.
from one of our attendees. Back to the Skiff Life panel. They discussed a number of companies and agencies, a number of things they can do to enhance the quality of the workplace. What has NGA done to make Skiff Life more appealing?
So one of the things that I quickly learned when I joined NGA was that we were on the cutting edge of really looking hard at what has to be done in a classified environment and what can be done in the unclassified environment. And that was largely driven by COVID, but there was a significant pivot to really focus on really separating that out. And so I think that was a huge piece of, and a huge factor in terms of where we need to continue to move forward, is taking that hard look at, does it have to be in the classified environment, or can we actually do it in the unclassified environment? Are there opportunities for telework? You heard the D&I earlier note that, that we are leading the way from an NGA perspective on telework and telework opportunities. So continuing to evolve, instead of change, continuing to evolve in that way rather than taking steps backwards is really the space we have to continue to be in.
So I have a unfounded, unproven theory, and we'll see how it turns out over the next 10 years, that during the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about primary caregivers or women who had to leave the workforce because they needed to have childcare at home. They weren't able to get childcare, schools were closed and everything. And it was a real crisis for, again, men too, who are primary caregivers or women. But I personally think that the flexibility that it did afford some people, and now it's more acceptable to do a conference call and carpool line, or to be taking care of somebody in a nursing home and be on a Zoom, that in the long haul, perhaps, it makes part-time or flexibility or being able to be a parent or a caregiver even more acceptable. How do you see that evolving within the government? Obviously, there's the skiff factor, but outside the skiff.
So I think, and I was actually just commenting on this probably about a week ago, it has been the shift to more telehealth and appointments online has been a game changer. So I'll just speak from my own personal vantage point. I don't live close to where I work. And all of the physicians that I need to be concerned with and the schools for my children are close to where I live. So if there's an appointment that I have to take for my children, whether it be medical or school related, typically what that would have meant prior to COVID is that I would be leaving the office, right, multiple hours ahead of time in order to be able to handle that appointment. Now, right, I can hop in my car, drive to where I make sure I have reception, and hop onto that 30-minute engagement, and then I'm back into my office. Right? That's, to me, is a game changer, and I think that's going to be a huge benefit for many others as well. I hope I answered your question.
You did. You absolutely did. So, as far as mentoring and advocates and sponsors, how do you think men can work with women as partners to improve women's recruitment and retention at NGA, across government, and even industry?
So I think the first piece, and I know that we did a little work on this at NGA. I guess a few years ago we had a survey that looked at the representation of women across the workforce, across the NGA workforce, in and across the agency. And one of the things it highlighted were areas that we could continue to focus on. And our federal women's program took that on and then started to pull together a series of activities that we could all engage in. And so I'm going to say that one more time, that we could all engage in. And this is where men really come into the conversation. Just because it's a Federal Women's Program Council event doesn't mean that it's only for women. And so I really love the fact that as I look across this room today, and it was highlighted earlier, that I see so many men represented in the room Because what it means to me is that there's a willingness to have a conversation, understand the issues that are facing women, and then there's a willingness to understand how each of us, whether female or male, can help, right, to address those issues. We're seeing the same thing when we look at the activities within NGA. Our Federal Women's Program Council has pulled together a series called Coffee with Mentors, and I've had the distinct pleasure of participating in that for a couple of different times. But it's not just about bringing women in to have this discussion about Coffee with Mentors, right? It's bringing a broad swath of individuals, so men participate in that equally. I will share with you just one additional personal experience, and one that has stuck with me over the last several years. I had an individual who worked for me at the time, and he asked for a little bit of time on my calendar, and I thought, I wonder what this meeting is all about. You know how sometimes you never know. And so he came in, and the question that he asked me was, what is it like to be a woman in this workspace? And the reason he asked the question was because he has daughters, and he wanted to understand what were some of the challenges that women were facing, and and this was the best part, how could he help in the workplace so that he was helping to address anything that, and I use the word issue, it's not always issues, right? It's just general support. It could be issues, but also general support. How could he do that? And then that, for him, was paying it forward for his daughters, which he knew would be, many years later, part of the workforce.
Quite forward thinking.
It was powerful.
Yes.
It was not the question that I expected. I did not expect that that's what the meeting was about, but I appreciated it. And even years later, I sent him a note, and because I was reminded of it, and I sent him a note thanking him for just that, the forward thinking and his willingness to have that sort of conversation.
And it's sort of along the lines of being comfortable at getting uncomfortable and asking those types of questions and knowing that maybe it's a safe space to ask that.
Yes.
So, you mentioned in high school there was, I don't know if it was a principal or a teacher that really identified that you would do well in a STEM career track, and then you embarked on that journey. Mm-hmm. What resources are available now, similar, to the program that you participated in? Is that still available, that you work with the government?
Yeah, so the program still exists. In some agencies, it's called the Stokes Undergraduate Scholar Program. In other agencies, it's called the Undergraduate Scholar Program. In its initial inception, and when I came in, it was really focused on bringing more minorities into the community. It still exists, but not necessarily in all cases with a focus on bringing more minorities into the community. But it does exist, and I think a number of the agencies within the intelligence community participate in the undergraduate scholar program.
So I would say in some ways that individual was a sponsor or a mentor of yours. Any other individuals you want to highlight or give a shout out to that have helped you along the way?
Sure. So there was one leader, and it was during a time I was working in the NRO, and it was very early in my career. So I'll highlight two different people. Both have passed at this point. But there was one very early in my career who brought a number of junior female officers into a conference room. I'll never forget this. She brought us into the conference room, and she said, okay, I'm here to explain to you all how this promotion process really works. And now that I look back, at the time I was thinking, what? What is this all about? And what she wanted to do was just to ensure that we understood how performance evaluations were done, what types of questions we should be asking when we were given our feedback, right? What we could expect out of the promotion process, right? That sort of thing. And it has stuck with me all these years later because, again, right, she recognized the value that she could bring to a swath of individuals by just simply taking the time to infuse the knowledge that she already had, right, and share that with us. So that's the first one. And then the second person, and I'll name this individual, Carol Staubach. I think many of you probably remember Carol. She was the one that really made me realize that I had a passion for working in the operations side at the NRO. And it was all simply because of a question that she asked me one day, and it was in a part of the organization, operations related, that she was working. She turned to me in a meeting that I was in with her, and she said, "Would you like to work here one day?" And I'll share with you, I was a junior officer, and I wasn't quite sure how to receive the question. And when you're a junior officer, you're trying to figure out what's the right answer. Well, the right answer was yes. And I had since been able to work in that area for many, many years. But I appreciated her taking the time to help me to realize this is a path for you. And so you look at my career, especially at the NRO, most of my years were spent in operations. And I credit that to her.
Wow. Yeah. Pretty profound. So the INSA team knows this, but a lot of times when we're interviewing folks for particularly internships, my two favorite questions to ask are, what is something about you that we can't see on your resume? And actually, John, you may have actually asked that question first, and then I now follow that. Mm-hmm. And what do you like to do for fun?
Oh, fun. So I'll answer the fun piece first. I enjoy spending time with my family. And that's just not my immediate family, but my extended family. And I was raised in a rural area. All of the family has always lived very close by. And in fact, my family members were my neighbors. So that has positives and negatives. But that's the way I grew up. And so my time, when I spend time, if you want to call it fun time, it's really about spending time with the family. And COVID, quite frankly, put a damper on that because we could not, do as much as we have traditionally done in terms of family gatherings. But that's the fun time. Now, I'll add one more piece to it, and that is the time that I spend in the K-2 through 12 program, right? The excitement that students get, and just being able to have some of the experiences that they have. If you'll indulge me just for a moment.
Please.
So recently, our chapter had an opportunity to take a group of students to NASA's facility at Wallops Island. And these are students who really hadn't thought anything about, space, satellites, or launch. Now, I'm absolutely thrilled that they're getting to go to Wallops. And it was just so refreshing to see, one, the excitement from having that experience, but two, their testimonials from the experience that they got. So just think about that. Now, my role, and you're going to love this, I'll tell you what my role was. My role was sending out text messages to all of the parents to make sure that they would RSVP to say whether or not their student could be there, making sure that we knew who was supposed to be on the bus, that I had all of their information, and that the chaperone for the event had all of that information. That was my role. You're looking at me going, that's the deputy director, that's what she's spending her time on. But yes, that is what I'm spending my time on. Because the reason I would invest that amount of time is it was just so rewarding. Now, each one of those students now know a little something more about space and launch. And imagine that, and how they can apply that in our community.
In a very tangible way.
In a very tangible way.
And I've also learned during our conversation that you're a much better family member than I am. Somebody asked me earlier what I like to do for fun, and I said, well, the pandemic was a big damper to it, but I like to be alone in my house with no one there. Didn't really happen with lots of kids Zooming all the time.
Yeah, so true.
So we have a question from an attendee. What is NGA doing to foster diversity among your vendors and contractors?
So one of the things, we've got a very active small business program. And so I highlight that because oftentimes we think about, the traditional companies that we work with, and that's not, certainly please don't take away from that comment that we don't value the traditional companies, because we absolutely do. But when we think about how we broaden that spectrum of the companies that are participating and are providing support to NGA, we leverage the small business program to be able to invite others in to participate.
So I actually think this is kind of a difficult question. At least I don't know what I would say, so I'm going to put you on the spot, and I bet you will have a rapid fire answer. But one of our attendees asked, can you help identify some little risk women can start to make to help them evolve to take the big risk?
Oh, yes. So I'll hit a couple of different ones. I resonated with the comment earlier today about self-limiting. I know personally in my career I've done that, right? I've looked at the job description and I've decided to apply for something different rather than what I really desired because I thought perhaps I needed that job for a stepping stone when I really didn't. So little risk, be willing to go for the job that you really want. Don't think that you need the stepping stone. So that's the one. I think the other piece is be willing, and I loved Sue's comment about being true to yourself, but be willing to just be you in the workspace. And it took me a while to realize that. And I'll just share that very openly. It took me a while to realize that. It took me a while to realize that it was okay to come in and say, I'm a mother of two. I have to fix breakfast before I get here, right? These are the things that I like to do in my spare time in terms of investing in others, right? To really just share all of that. And the reason I say take the risk to share that sort of information is because there's somebody else out there that needs to hear that you're sharing that. I remember the very first time that in a small group setting, I talked about what it was like being a mom and juggling a job. And there was another officer that came up to me afterwards, and she said, I kept wondering how you do it. And she said, because I have kids. And she said, I kept wondering how you do it. And I talked about the fact that I have, my parents as a support system and all of those things. But just being willing to be open in that way really shed a light for someone else.
So I'm going to help you out with
Yeah.
the answer to this next question. So
Okay.
I'm going to survey the audience, and I want everybody to raise their hand who considers themselves a liberal arts person. Like your idea of technology is, as someone mentioned, unplugging something and plugging it back in.
That does work, though.
Don't be
Unplug it and
shy.
plug
It's
it
nothing to
back
be ashamed of.
in. It does work.
So this attendee wants to know, do you think engineers make better senior leaders?
Oh. So I think engineers bring a different perspective. I don't think that engineers make better senior leaders. What we in fact need is we need diversity of thought in the senior leadership. That's what we need. And what that means is people that have different backgrounds, right? Different majors that you're bringing in. And I'll give you a great example. My sister's area of expertise is accounting. And so when we start to get into a discussion about spreadsheets and other things, she sees it very differently than I do, right? And it's because she brings a different perspective from her training. I know that's a small example, but the point that I'm making is that each of us uniquely brings something different. And we need the combination of all of that to be able to have successful leadership across the community.
You handled that beautifully. You
No
could run
worries.
for office.
I could? Oh, I think I'll pass on that piece.
So can you talk about your role as a senior champion for ERGs? I think most people know that's employee resource groups, but
Yes.
or are there any newer ERGs that you all have established at NGA?
Okay, I think I might know who gave that question. And so I'll pull the thread on, I think what you're looking for in the answer, and I'll speak specifically to my personal experience. So when I was serving at NRO, and actually in my current position, I still support in this role, I was a senior champion for the African American Diversity Network at NRO. And the reason I spent time, and I still spend time engaging in that role, is because I felt like it was important to be able to give a voice to employee resource groups. Now, that's not the only employee resource group that I would certainly support, but it's the one that I ended up serving as a senior champion for. And it's really important, and it's important because each of the individuals within our particular work units need to see that we're willing to spend our time and invest our effort on things that are focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. If we don't model that, then others will think that it's okay not to participate. And so that's why I spend my time, and that's why I still engage. Thank you for the question. That's why I still engage with the NRO on that particular program. Now, just ERGs in general, it was so refreshing to hear the D&I, and I knew this already, talk about how she meets with each of the affinity groups across the community So one of the things that I have started doing since arriving at NGA is doing the exact same thing. And the way I've aligned it at this point is according to the observance months. And what it's really about is to get a chance to see different segments of our workforce and to understand what's important to each of them, understand what we're doing well, and the areas for opportunity as well. So someone mentioned, I think it was Ellen, that mentioned accessibility as an overall topic. And one of the most interesting discussions that I've had across each of those, we call them at NGA special emphasis program councils, was with the deaf and hard of hearing community. And it was really because it opened up and for me specifically, opened my perspective in terms of understanding what were the things that would make a difference for that segment of our workforce. And some of the things I knew, some of the things I didn't know. So just taking a little time to sit down and have that conversation was rewarding. Again, not just rewarding, but the discussion translated to action, which is really important too in the DEIA space.
Well, I mentioned earlier when I first met you, I thought you were a really good listener, and so I think that's very reflective of your work with the ERG group. So we just have a couple more minutes, and we have some college students in the room or folks that are more junior in the workforce, and then this will be rebroadcast. It'll be on our website. People can watch it next week, which will give us an opportunity to reach even more students. But anything you want to touch on about recruitment at NGA, how it has evolved or gone back to the way it was when we were doing more of the virtual recruitment during the height of the pandemic?
So yes, a couple of different things. So the one that I'll highlight is that we're leveraging the virtual environment to have engagements across multiple universities with some focus on HBCUs, MSIs as well. I know we also had a virtual engagement with Gallaudet. And it was in the spirit of trying to ensure that each of the universities understood the types of work roles that we were hiring for, that there was an opportunity to answer questions about our process, and that there was just general awareness of NGA as an organization. And the technology, if we think about it, really has changed or evolved how we're able to do that. If you think about the traditional methodology would be to do campus visits. So, right, we can do more engagement than we could in a campus visit construct simply by leveraging technology to be able to do those sorts of engagements. And I heard, I don't know, I might be mistaken, but I heard that there were a few people in here that might be looking for job opportunities. We're hiring at NGA.
Duly noted, duly noted. Well, thank you for joining us today and letting us learn a little bit more about you personally and what you've accomplished thus far, I think in a very short time at NGA and what your plans are for the future. And they're setting up the podium, but if you'll sit tight with me, because Herman's gonna wanna get a photo and he knows how much I love having my picture taken. I'll just close things out here, but I really wanna thank everybody for coming today. It's just a different element when we can do these types of events in person. Couple of sponsors I want to recognize: CGI, Esri, Exeger, GDIT, LMI, Mantech, Northrop Grumman, Peraton, Raytheon Intelligence and Space, SAIC, and our small business sponsor, Sims Software, Clearance Jobs, AWIC, the Iron Butterfly podcast for their sponsor, for their support of today's program. And I wanted to mention after this, there is a reception out on the balcony. Great photo opportunities with the monument in the background. Jeff Levine is holding the yoga bags and mats. Chances are Jeff has never done yoga, but that remains to be seen. There's always tomorrow, Jeff. But also just really want to thank all of our panelists and speakers who stuck around for the program today. What a wonderful opportunity. And I would imagine when we have the recording of this, we'll also maybe have some slides of the visual storytelling available for folks who need kind of a cheat sheet of today's occurrences. So anyway, thank you. I look forward to seeing you all out on the balcony and at the putting contest shortly. So.